if you're playing football, you tear your ACL or you sprain an ankle or you get a concussion. Well, that's a known accepted risk of playing football. But being run to death during practice when you're struggling and coaches are watching you and screaming at you to continue on, that's not a risk that's inherent in football.
Welcome to Hot Docket, the show where we talk about winning marketing strategies that have built the most successful law firms.
Join us every 2 weeks for the latest trends and tactics to grow your law firm. Welcome to the Hot Docket. We're here today with Jeff Murphy, and we're going to talk about personal injury.
You started with the intro. That's unusual.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm excited, and I'm going to let Jeff speak a little bit more about it, but it's something I've never heard of as like a specialty.
Can you tell us a little bit about the sports death-related cases that you've seen over the years?
Yeah. No, I appreciate it, guys. I appreciate the opportunity to be on here, and I could go on and on this topic. So please raise your hand or stop me whenever you feel like we need to go in a different direction. But I've been, I'm a lawyer in Tampa, Florida, doing only personal injury. I've been doing it for 35 years now. And I handle a lot of auto cases, car accidents, truck accidents, slip and falls, construction accidents, the typical cases that you would think that involve personal injury, I handle. But I have also, over the last 15 years or so, developed kind of a niche with sports injury or sports death cases. I've had about 7 different cases all over the country, from South Carolina to California to North Carolina, and then several here in Florida, that involve the death of student athletes. A couple of them have been high school football players, but the majority of them have been college football players. And typically what you find is that, I don't know if either of you guys ever played sports, but, you're a little bit younger than I am. But if you go back to the day, in the old days when the coaches were just relentless on the players, you see movies about it and that kind of stuff, about how over the top some of these coaches are. And it's getting a little bit better, but it still exists. You have situations where the players come to camp, after summer break, or they go home for Christmas break, or they go home for spring break, and then they come back. And a lot of the coaches, for whatever reason, seem like they want to, punish the kid for having time off or whatever. And so in every single one of our cases, what I noticed was they all occurred during conditioning, okay, at the beginning of the conditioning period. So whether it's when the 2-a-days start in August, before the season, or they go away for spring break and they come back for spring practice at the very beginning of that, it's always during conditioning drills when they're not acclimated, when they're not quite in shape yet. That's when they really run into trouble. It's never during a practice, during the season, once the games start. It's never during a game. It's always during these, they used to call them kind of, what they call them, mat drills back in the day, where they get you in these rooms and they put you on these mats, and it's just relentless. And the kids aren't acclimated and aren't used to they're not in shape yet. And so it really puts them at great risk, especially bigger kids who aren't as good a shape, lineman type kids. A couple of our cases involved sickle cell trait, which is not always, but it's by and large a condition that African American football players have, and it can predispose them to a sickling event. And what that means, it's not like having sickle cell disease, okay, or sickle cell anemia, which we've all heard of. They only have one of the genes. They don't have both, so they only have the sickle cell trait. But what happens is when their bodies get put under an extreme amount of stress, the blood cells can form into a sickle shape, almost like a crescent moon shape, and they get clogged up in the bloodstream and they don't reach the organs. And the player will, it's not a situation where in most of our, and this will be the last thing I say, and then I'll let y'all ask some questions, but it's not a situation where, I don't know if you remember Hank Gathers, a basketball player. He's a college basketball player years ago, running down the court, boom, collapses and dies. That's not what sickle cell trait looks like. That's not what heat exhaustion looks like. That's sudden death from a cardiac condition. That's what Hank Gathers had. God bless him. Or Len Bias. I'm sure you heard about Len Bias. But with the sickling event or with a heat exhaustion event, the player is struggling for a period of time, right? He's exhibiting signs of struggle and real issues. And, the coaches, and a lot of times it's the strength coaches, the strength and conditioning coaches, think sometimes that the player is being I'll put it nicely, a wimp. And so they're screaming at him to get back up and continue while they've got these medical issues going on. And that, unfortunately, can result in very serious injuries and or death. So we have had every single case that we have had has had a successful outcome for the family. So that's been something that I've done, and I've really enjoyed that line of work.
How did these cases work from like a waiver standpoint? Because I imagine the very first thing these players do is sign a waiver that says something like there's danger inherent, there's risks inherent. I know this is kind of the way that like ski resorts out west get away with it, is you just sign away your rights. So how does it work for this?
That's a great question. And in our very first case that we had in Orlando against the University of Central Florida, there was a waiver. But it was, number one, it was buried in like a 10-page document. It wasn't clearly a release and waiver of all your rights. The paragraph wasn't even titled release and waiver, but it did have release language. But the court held that would, because it was buried in the document, that was not a knowing waiver by the student athlete. And the other thing is, most of those releases will say that we are releasing the school from any claims relating to the risks inherent in football, right? So, if you're playing football, you tear your ACL or you sprain an ankle or you get a concussion, well, that's a known accepted risk of playing football. But being run to death during practice when you're struggling and coaches are watching you and screaming at you to continue on, that's not a risk that's inherent in football. So many times people do sign releases, but there can be numerous ways to get around them. And we were successful in that case in getting around the release. What we were not successful on, and we were also successful at trial. The jury awarded the family $10 million. But unfortunately, it was a case against University of Central Florida, which is a state entity. And Florida has what's called limited sovereign immunity. And so the school, this is a whole nother issue, but I'll just briefly mention it because I find it interesting. The school, even though they're a public school, created a private corporation to run their entire athletics department. So we sued the private corporation, which was affiliated with the university. They had $21 million in insurance coverage. So after we got our jury verdict for $10 million and tried to collect against that $21 million, they appealed and argued that their corporation, even though it was a private corporation that they had set up, because it was affiliated with the state and created by a state university, that they also got the benefit of the immunity. And the Florida Supreme Court agreed with them. So our $10 million verdict was reduced to $200,000, which is the cap in the state of Florida. So, but that didn't stop us. We went on after that, and like I said, we've had about 6 other cases that ended up very well for the families.
Why do they have that structure where they set up a private entity?
Yeah, great question. they're called DSOs, direct support organizations, and universities will do it primarily for there's what they call it, the sunshine laws. In Florida, they call it the sunshine laws, where everything's kind of, if you're a state entity, then you're subject to all sorts of disclosures and all sorts of information that the public is allowed to get. When you create these, and you also have to jump through all sorts of hoops when you want to bid something out. You want to hire somebody to do something, you got to put out open bidding and let all these people come, and because you're a state entity, and allow all these people compete for the bid. When you set up a DSO, a private corporation, you don't have many of those limitations. People can't get all your records and documents with the public records request. You don't have to jump through all these hoops when you're trying to do construction or bid things out. You can just kind of do it without having to go through all those obligations that are imposed on the state.
When you're handling a case like this, how are you getting around, like, I think a common objection, which is, how can you tell the difference between somebody who's been pushed too hard and somebody who's being pushed to the edge of their limit, right? Like, it probably looks the same to a coach. Somebody's struggling. Yeah. How do you kind of address that objection?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you have to have a great athletic training staff, and you got to have coaches who listen to the staff. Okay. And that's where the disconnect is, because a trainer, no matter how good he is as a trainer, if he's afraid of the coach, or doesn't want to speak up to the coach, or the coach is too intimidating, which many of these coaches are. I mean, they're type A, hard charging guys, successful, strong, and it's hard sometimes to tell them, to go to them and say, hey, this guy needs to sit out. The trainer might get worried that he's going to get fired. So the lack of communication between the training staff and the coaches is a big problem. But the answer to your question, number one, we've had a couple of our cases where the players had sickle cell trait. The trainer who was on the field did not know. Okay, there were other trainers who knew, because they test all these kids now when they come into college. They test them right when they start to see whether they've got this sickle cell trait. And this kid in Orlando, God bless him, Eric Plancher, was just an outstanding young man. Tested positive for sickle cell trait, and it was in his file. But the trainer who was on the field at the time was unaware. So when he saw him struggling, he was a wide receiver, okay? So he wasn't a big, heavy-set offensive lineman or something like that. When he saw him struggling, he figured the kid was just out of shape. He had no idea that he had sickle cell trait. And so, but I think that you will, in all of these cases, when we have taken depositions of the teammates who were at the practice, they have all made it clear in every one of our cases that the struggle was not, that you could clearly tell when somebody's gasping for air and they're tired versus when somebody's about to die and going through a 5 or a 10-minute or 15-minute process of real, life and death struggle. And it impaired, the problem with it is it impairs, the kid's cognition, his ability to think for himself, and he's getting yelled at. And most of these kids, great players and great teammates, a lot of them are very compliant. I mean, they want to please their coaches, right? I mean, they want to start, they want to be on the field, so they're not going to quit for anything if you're yelling at them. They don't know they're dying, and you put on top of that the fact that these, especially heat exhaustion, can really mess with your mind. You can even start hallucinating. That can really affect the player's ability to stop on his own. So the long answer to your short question is that, the players have all said that there was a notable difference between the struggle they saw these kids who were dying versus just a normal struggle during a practice.
Does the sickle cell issue also impact kids who are younger? So let's say high school, middle school, anything like that, yeah. Or does it only kick in once they get a little bit older?
No, absolutely. It can happen. It has happened in high school. And it's happened in numerous colleges. simply because you're pushed harder typically in college. I mean, that's the real reason for it. I think where you see more of it in college, and a lot of it, there have been situations where 8 or 10 people have come down with not from sickle cell trait, but from overexertion. They get a condition called rhabdomyolysis, which basically eats up your muscle tissue and your kidneys and causes all sorts of trouble. That incident with all those kids, that they all survived, thank goodness. But yeah, generally, I think 99% of the time the kids are just pushed that much harder in college. So a kid might have sickle cell trait and go through his whole high school career and never have one issue, and not even know about it really until he goes to college and he's tested and he finds out about it.
Does any part of you think that it might be that in high school communities are closer, people don't want to, go after the coach who is also the deli store clerk or what have you, and that might be the reason why you see more prevalence of these lawsuits at the college level?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that goes hand in hand with, right? I mean, I don't know if you guys played high school sports. I played high school and I played some college, and high school was fun. It was a blast. College is a business. It's all about money. So just by its very nature, they're being pushed. They're being pushed so much harder than almost every high school in the country. So yeah, I think what you said is right. There is a little bit of a community there. People actually seem to care about each other more. And in college, they may very well care about you, but they also care about their jobs and keep continuing to make the money that they're making and putting a winning team on the field. That's how they keep their jobs.
I'm actually saying something a little bit different, because what is a little disconnected to me is high school. There's going to be a wider variance of fitness level. Like, there will probably be more people who are more out of shape. So I would think the prevalence of like people being pushed too hard could be as high or higher, but people like parents or whomever don't necessarily want to go the legal route when something happens because it's a tight community, everyone knows everyone, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I hear you. No, I am actually, in addition to being a 35-year personal injury lawyer, this is my 17th year of being a volunteer high school football coach.
Oh, nice.
So I do that as well. And I think that you're absolutely right. The high school kids are not nearly in as good a shape as the college kids, especially the kids who aren't going to go on and play at the next level. But because of that, and I've seen quite a bit of heat issues, especially here in Florida. But we have a very good trainer. Our training staff is great. And the kids who are not going to the next level, by and large, aren't pushing themselves the same way. It's just, I just haven't seen that. And so, I do think that I have probably seen more cases of kids struggling in high school than I did in college, but not to the level of struggle, because our school is probably a little bit different. We got like 15 coaches out there at any one practice. We have a lot of people out there, so everybody's keeping an eye on somebody. But you bring up a really good point. I just haven't it even though some heat related issues may start, it stops way before it gets to a serious level. And knock on wood, I hope that always continues.
So take your lawyer hat off for a second and put the coach hat on. Can you tell us a little bit about what the signs actually look like? So the difference between a kid who's struggling because he's out of shape and somebody who's actually going through serious heat exhaustion, heat stroke, the sickle cell issue you're talking about. Can you describe in detail what that looks like?
Yeah, we actually, in one of our cases, our expert had a video of an Army, of a military kid who was in a training protocol, and had sickle cell trait, and they actually have him running his conditioning drill while he's sickling. Fortunately, he did not die. They were able to save him before, but it looked like somebody running in slow motion or in quicksand. It was and just really not just tired and gasping for air, but like really struggling with his movements. It really just like slow motion, and it's all I can say is like nothing I'd ever seen before. And I've seen a lot of kids out on football fields throughout the years, gasping for air, tired, exhausted, if you want to say that, even some hyperventilating. But I've never seen anything like what I saw. And that goes back to what I said earlier about the teammates of these players who I've represented, all saying that they saw things that even they knew with, an untrained medical eye or a non-medical eye, that they knew that something was seriously wrong.
Do you know the prevalence of that genetic trait?
I don't. I would say that there are all sorts of studies out there, and I knew the answer to that at one time. But I would say, in my experience, it's been like you got a team of 50 or 60 kids, 2 or 3 of them.
Okay, so it's still pretty prevalent.
Meaningful amount.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's made. They have the NCAA has actually come out with a chapter on sickle cell trait for medical staff and for coaches to read. So it's a very, even though it's not common, it's well known enough that it's treated very seriously by the NCAA.
So those 7, or I think you said 7 or so cases that you've had going back to 2010, how did you get those cases? How did people find out about your firm?
So the first one in Orlando, I don't know. I was with a prior firm, and I don't know how that came in. But once we had success with that, and we had success at least as far as the jury verdict goes. That was pretty well publicized, and we used experts in that case, and so our name just kind of got out there a little bit. And so other families, when this thing happened, I don't know if they Googled, I don't know exactly how they found us, but they reached out to us because of our experience with these prior cases.
I think it's a point towards like niching down. Who's that guy in Miami who like all he does is building collapse? You know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, they're actually
Mazzaludi or something.
It's actually in Philly. It's Mongolesi
or Mongoleti. Yeah, I think there's something to, even if it comes in your door accidentally. Like once you found a niche, it's going to pay dividends, even if you didn't go out intending to find it.
I get calls from other lawyers around the country who have similar cases, and they've actually called us a couple of times. They've gotten us involved, but a couple of times they just want to pick my brain and see if they're doing the right thing and that sort of thing. So yeah, it has definitely been, and I'm glad. I love the work. It's very rewarding, but in a way, I'm also glad that I haven't gotten any more cases recently, because that hopefully means that there's not a lot of this kind of stuff happening anymore. It's really over the last 10 to 15 years, really over the last 10 years, it's gotten a lot better with the coaches and the strength and conditioning staff.
Yeah, I'm sure those are incredibly hard cases.
It seems like you've had good success at trial, but then you've got the issues with like immunity. Is that the hardest part about some of these cases? And is that like a common theme where it's structured in a way where it's actually hard to collect even when you get a jury verdict?
Yeah, well, it totally depends on the state, right? So Florida is one of those states that has a cap. South Carolina also has a cap, but it's higher. It's closer to it's less than 1 million, but it's much more than 200. We had a case out in California against Cal Berkeley. where California had no caps. So it really depends on the state. But yeah, you have a real problem, in Florida. If you get hit by, if you get this Eric Plancher who died playing football at the University of Central Florida, or if you're driving down the road and you get hit by a DOT worker who's driving a pickup truck and runs you over and kills you, in Florida, you're capped. I mean, you get $200,000 and that's it. Now there is something called a claims bill, which is very difficult to get, but you can petition the legislature. Let's say you have a case and you go to trial and you get a $5 million verdict, but there's a $200,000 cap. You can petition the legislature to pass what's called a claims bill, authorizing you to collect on that claim. It usually takes unusually sad circumstances for the legislature to grant a claims bill. They typically won't do it in just a run-of-the-mill case, but if it's an egregious case and the circumstances are extremely tragic, then sometimes you can get those passed. But that's a long, long road to hoe.
Okay. I think that's a pretty good place for us to stop for today. Jeff, I don't know that we were going into this expecting to talk entirely about sports death related cases, but it was pretty fascinating. So we ended up spending our time here. Thanks again for coming on our show. And is there anything else that you want listeners to check out or hear or what have you?
No, I think that's it. I mean, I was happy to share my experiences, and I'm always happy to speak with anybody who has questions about these types of cases, or really any personal injury case. You can reach out to me, give me a call, shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. I really appreciate the opportunities, guys, and I look forward to doing it again.
Thanks, Jeff, and we'll put your info and links and all that good stuff in the show notes, so folks have easy access. See everyone on the next Hot Docket. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Hot Docket. We're your hosts, Bobby and Andrew, founders of MeanPug, the marketing agency for ambitious law firms.
Have questions about marketing or anything we covered today? Email us at bark@meanpug.com.